Honorable Minister Edrunga.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Comme il est de coutume, permettez-moi d'abord de remercier les membres de l'Assemblée qui ont participé au débat sur ce projet de loi. Il y a eu, Monsieur le Président, pendant les débats, des interrogations soulevées par les membres de l'opposition et je vais apporter des éclaircissements. Mais avant tout, permettez-moi d'informer la Chambre et la population aussi que l'introduction de ce projet de loi fait partie de nos engagements pris envers la population en 2020 dans notre programme gouvernemental et au paragraphe 109, et je cite, « Government will introduce a legislative framework for better protection of our water resources and create a water observatory to serve as a public information portal on the quantity and quality of water resources. » Monsieur le Président, il y a eu certes des commentaires qui sont raisonnables des deux côtés de la Chambre, mais malheureusement, certains membres de l'opposition ont voulu faire de la démagogie. Et il est important aussi de signaler cela, Monsieur le Président. J'ai été un peu choqué d'entendre la déclaration de l'honorable Ousmane Mohamed. Et que ça, that this be recorded, Mr. Speaker, ça, ce qu'il a dit. Il a fait comprendre à la Chambre et à la population que demain au pouvoir, bon, on sait qu'ils ne vont pas arriver au pouvoir, mais demain au pouvoir, ils vont supprimer cette loi, Monsieur le Président. C'est-à-dire l'Alliance Parti travailliste et MMM vont supprimer cette loi, Monsieur le Président. Monsieur le Président, ce projet de loi a été rédigé afin que l'État puisse répondre aux défis dans le secteur de l'eau dans les années à venir et donc approvisionner. Ces deux mots sont très importants, raisonnablement et équitablement la population et les secteurs agricoles et économiques de notre pays. Un projet de loi qui permet aussi une plus grande solidarité parmi tous les opérateurs pendant les périodes sèches. Maintenant, à écouter certaines interventions, c'est clair, Monsieur le Président, que certains membres de l'opposition défendent certains lobbies et non pas l'intérêt de la population. Monsieur le Président, je vais maintenant aborder les différents points soulevés lors des débats. Mr. Speaker, so let me say it again. I am very disappointed, and every time we debate on a piece of legislation, we see that in Parliament. Members from the other side of the House, they've been unable to rise above petty politics in their various interventions, Mr. Speaker. So, je vais reprendre un peu ce qui a été dit par les membres de l'opposition. Mr. Speaker, so this legislation is one that will bring a significant and meaningful difference to the economic and social development of our island. This legal framework for a holistic, integrated and sustainable development of our finite water resources is already long overdue. Mr. Speaker, sir, a better and more sustainable management of our water resources will definitely reduce risk of scarcity and will be beneficial for industries heavily dependent on water, such as agriculture and energy production. Mr. Speaker, sir, for the citizens of our country at large, this new legislation will bring more reliable water supply and enhanced quality as well as a sustainable natural ecosystems. one thing that has been canvassed by members of the opposition. But let me reassure the House, Mr. Speaker, sir, that every care has been taken in this legislation to embed elements of transparency, accountability, and objectivity. In fact, Mr. Speaker, sir, all decision-making instances are guided by clear parameters and criteria in the crucial process of water allocations. Now, with regard to constitutional rights, Mr. Speaker, sir, I am satisfied that the drafting of the bill has benefited from the wide and indubitable experience of former Chief Justice Honorable Ashraf Konai. And again, every care has been taken to protect the constitutional rights of holders of concession titles and Supreme Court orders regarding their water use entitlement. Mr. Speaker, sir, unfortunately, few have talked about an essential aspect of the legislation, especially on the other sides, which deals with protection of our water resources. Protection and conservation are at the heart of the Water Resources Bill. Mr. Speaker, sir, we are living the impacts of climate change in our daily lives. This said, Mr. Speaker, sir, allow me to shed light and dispel some of the untruths that we have heard from members on the other side of the House. I can say that some have merely delivered on a brief that they have received from their leader and not really convinced of what they are saying, and others ont voulu défendre l'indéfendable, Monsieur le Président. And they have failed in doing so to understand the fundamental principles underlying this vital legislation, and they have missed the forest for the trees. And I find this very unfortunate, Mr. Speaker, sir. Now, let me dwell on the powers of the minister in the bill, which has been lengthily canvassed by members on the other side of the House. Mr. Speaker, sir, during my second reading, I have taken much care and time to elaborate in great details the different provisions of the bill, especially related to the powers and duties of the minister. Let me start with Clause 7. The powers granted to the minister at Clause 7 are a series of compelling obligations. Thus, we see that the minister shall set national objectives, the minister shall cause to be developed and implemented strategies, the minister shall ensure coordination, the minister shall issue guidelines, and so on. Now, other powers of the minister at Clause 7 are bridled by conditions and parameters. For example, and this is important, it is on the recommendations of the Water Resources Technical Committee that the minister can grant water use permits, and the basis on which the Water Resources Technical Committee determines applications is already set out in the bill. Now, with regard to the permitting process, I have also clearly explained that the minister will act on the recommendations of the Water Resources Technical Committee, which is a multi-sectoral committee of officials hailing from no less than 8 ministries involved in the subject matter of water resources. Mr. Speaker, sir, these representatives will see to it that the concerns of the respective sectors are addressed. In determining applications for water use permits and making recommendations to the minister, that Water Resources Technical Committee is bound by Clause 4, Clause 8, Clause 23, and Clause 26 of the bill, which concern the criteria already specified in the law for water entitlement. The aspects to be taken into account when determining application as well as the conditions to which the permit is subjected. And this ensures uniformity, transparency, and trust in the decision-making process. Moreover, Mr. Speaker, sir, given the importance of the subject of water, approval of Cabinet of Ministers as the highest level of authority will be sought on the grant of permit. Mr. Speaker, sir, you will agree with me that this should enhance public trust in the system. Mr. Speaker, sir, I've also heard the leader of the opposition refer to powers of the minister to exempt small planters from holding a permit to draw water from a river. This is at clause 36.2, and I draw the attention of the honourable member that there is no ministerial power linked to this provision. It is purely an administrative decision. Et je pense qu'en tant qu'ancien ministre de l'Agriculture, on n'aurait pas pensé que le leader de l'opposition se serait senti nerveux à l'idée d'aider les petits planteurs. Ou peut-être ai-je tort, Monsieur le Président. Now, as for comments again on the powers of the minister and constitutionality, Mr. Speaker, sir, it is critical to highlight that a minister is bound in the exercise of his duties to take into account and respect all entrenched constitutional rights. Now, I came across an article in the press with a resounding title, seeking to create, as normal in certain press, du sensationnel, quand l'État veut accaparer les sources d'eau souterraines. Monsieur le Président, et cela a été dit par l'honorable Jagat-Pal un peu plus tôt, les eaux souterraines ont toujours appartenu à l'État. C'est inscrit dans la Constitution à la section 8.5. De plus, l'article 3 du Groundwater Act de 1969 stipule que, et je cite, « All groundwater shall vest in the state ». Et l'article 5.2 du Water Resources Bill qui est devant nous vient reproduire ces mêmes dispositions. Mr. Speaker, sir, as for those entitled to a water right by virtue of a concession title or a Supreme Court order, the Water Resources Bill provides that they should apply for a registration of such existing water right by submitting the relevant documentary evidence to the Water Resources Commission within 6 months of the commencement of Clause 48 of the Act. And the Commission is bound to register such orders following an application for registration in accordance with Clauses 50 and 51.1 of the Bill. The definition of water rights at Clause 2 of the Bill is relevant. Now, as for one of the comments regarding the loss of a concession title by a person, I wish to draw the attention of the House to Clause 49, according to which a person who makes an application for the registration of an existing water right under this part shall submit to the Commission the title of concession or the order of the Supreme Court or such other title or document that establishes his right. Mr. Speaker, sir, furthermore, and let me clarify this, there can be no amendment to any order made by the Supreme Court except by way of an application to the Supreme Court in accordance with Clause 52 of the Bill. And there may be an amendment only following a determination by the Supreme Court in accordance with Clause 53 of the Bill. Mr. Speaker, sir, there is no discretionary power of the minister involved. Only the Supreme Court can amend any order that it has given, Mr. Speaker, sir. And the powers of the Supreme Court have not in any way been removed or tampered with in regard to existing water rights, which are the subject of an order of the Supreme Court, unlike what some members on the other side of the House would like to make the population believe. Mr. Speaker, sir, the bill goes further. The constitutional rights, if affected, will be dealt through the provisions of Clause 54, and any compensation ensuing therewith will be determined according to Clauses 55 and 56. Now, and I must say that, Mr. Speaker, sir, some comments were also made, let me put it this way, sadly, by a member with a legal background on the other side of the House regarding powers of the minister to impose fees and waive fees. Mr. Speaker, sir, as is commonly the case in several other enactments, the minister is entrusted with the responsibility to impose fees in respect of the issue of permits, which falls under his responsibility. And it is significant to note that such powers are exercisable by the minister under the Water Resources Bill under prescribed conditions based on objective criteria. For example, the minister may only waive fees under Clause 27 where the use of the water is required in the public interest, and I refer to Clause 27(2). Secondly, the minister may impose fees in relation to the annual cost of a water use permit, which, as is laid down under Clause 27, has to be calculated based on the volume of water allocated under the permit. And in addition, the minister may only do so following, and I say it again, the recommendation of the Water Resources Technical Committee, which is made up, as I stated some time back, of at least 8 representatives of ministries who are involved in the subject matter of water resources. Fourth, payment of fees may only be done by the enactment of regulations in accordance with Clause 78(2)(p). In this connection, Mr. Speaker, sir, it is important to bear in mind Clauses 20, 21, and 23 of the Interpretation and General Clauses Act with regard to parliamentary control over regulations, which in the present case would apply to the levying of fees, to the levying and payment of fees under this legislation. Should the power of imposed fees be made otherwise, then, Mr. Speaker, sir, there would be no parliamentary control over such matter. The leader of the opposition, Mr. Speaker, sir, also referred, and I believe Honorable Joanna Béranger also made reference to powers that have been removed from the Supreme Court. Mr. Speaker, sir, in addition to what I've already said regarding water rights conferred by virtue of concessions of Supreme Court orders, allow me to add that clauses of the Rivers and Canals Act, which have been repealed and which concern the Supreme Court, are essentially of an administrative nature, as they relate mainly to the control of activities near rivers or the establishment of public facilities, and Clause 29 of the Rivers Canal Act enacted as far as 1863. Now, the Honorable Attorney General made reference to that. But let me take 2 examples to make the House understand what I'm saying for purpose of clarity. Clause 26 of the Rivers and Canal Acts titled Control of Activities Near Rivers, which goes back to 1863, provides inter alia that, and I quote, where any premises specified in subclause 1 or any quantity of sugar, cane, trash, bagasse, syrup, molasses, wash, manure, dung, or accumulation of matter of any kind, or any sewer, ditch, or drain appears to the Supreme Court, after a report on the matter by one or more persons of skill and after the parties interested have been duly called, to be so situated that any water or matter from there can defile any river or stream, the occupier of the premises shall remove the water or matter or make arrangements to the satisfaction of the permanent secretary or of some skilled person appointed by the Supreme Court for preventing the defiling, end of quote. And clause 29 further provides that the authority of the Supreme Court shall be necessary for the establishment by the permanent secretary of any public drinking fountain, reservoir, bath, or washing house in or in the course of any river or stream, and to the withdrawing from that river or stream, or from any spring which is public property of any water for supplying such establishment. Mr. Speaker, sir, it stands to reason that these matters are not matters which should fall under the responsibility of the Supreme Court in 2024, Mr. Speaker, sir. Again, the Honorable Attorney General canvassed on that. We have letters from the judiciary, that is letters from Honorable Chief Justice, that they are agreeable to what we have proposed in this piece of legislation, Mr. Speaker, sir. Mr. Speaker, sir, Honorable Utim went further to qualify the provisions regarding water rights as unconstitutional. First of all, I will remind the Honorable Member that the bill has been prepared by Honorable Ashraf Konai, a former Chief Justice, and I'm confident that all matters relating to constitutionality has been duly and carefully addressed. Mr. Speaker, sir, there are detailed provisions for constitutional redress in the bill under Part 5, and provisions to question the legality of any acquisition of any existing water right or property and the payment of adequate compensation as required under Section 8 of our Constitution. It is also important to bear in mind that the implementation of policies to ensure a sustainable and adequate supply of water for the needs of the population and for the current and future social and economic needs of the people of Mauritius would require both a mid-term and long-term vision for the construction and development of the appropriate infrastructure. This, Mr. Speaker, sir, would involve the building and development of appropriate infrastructure like dams and reservoirs, canal, and other works related to water resources infrastructure. The bill also provides the appropriate legal framework and adequate and fair constitutional protection for a aggrieved party where such developments may require the taking of possession or acquisition of any existing water right or private property. Now, several speakers on the other side of the House have raised the issue concerning that there is a lack of provision for appeal in the bill. Mr. Speaker, sir, let me refer the House to parts 2 and 3 of the bill with regard to water use permitting process. As I have stated earlier, applications are processed by the Commission and submitted to the Water Resources Technical Committee for examination and for making, it will be for the Water Resources Technical Committee to make recommendations to the Minister for subsequent approval of Cabinet. It is a tried law, Mr. Speaker, sir, that where there is no provision for appeal, any administrative decision may be challenged by way of judicial review. In the Water Resources Bill, it has been considered more expeditious and convenient to deal with cases of appeal through judicial review. By nature of the water use permit, where decisions mainly relate to permitting and existing water rights, and which involves legal and constitutional aspects, it is more convenient for these to be dealt at the level of the Supreme Court. And appellate procedures are normally for more technical matters. Mr. Speaker, sir, if there had been an appellate body, there would still be a right of judicial review from the decision of the appellate body by the aggrieved party, and this would have required a more lengthy and tedious process. And this is what we don't want, Mr. Speaker, sir. Now, a lot also has been said with regard to the concept of public interest. Mr. Speaker, sir, to dwell on the concept of public interest which is found in the Water Resources Bill. But let me put it this way, some members have deliberately, on the other side, chosen to read parts of the bill in isolation and painted a false picture, thus failing to understand and convey the underlying rationale for catering for public interest when it comes to water as a human right. Water is essential for life, Mr. Speaker, and this has been said in this House. And governments have a duty to protect the health, safety, and welfare of our citizens. Public interest is a fundamental concept in a legislation on water resources, ensuring that the allocation, management, and protection of water resources serve the collective needs and rights of the population. And it is a concept which is widely recognized and integrated in water supply and management practices. Countries like South Africa, Australia, the US, and India emphasize ensuring sufficient water supply for human needs before allocating water for other purposes, Mr. Speaker, sir. And let me put it this way, the minister cannot depart from the objects of the Act when defining public interest. Now, Honorable Utim proved to practice very selective reading in his understanding of the bill. Now, allow me to provide the House with accurate information on what the Water Resources Bill provides in order to address equitable access for sustainable management of water resources. And I will take 3 examples to call off his bluff, Mr. Speaker, sir. Let me refer to Clause 27.2, Clause 29, and Clause 32. Clause 27.2 of the bill states that, I quote, "The ministry may, where the use of water is required in the public interest, waive any payment under this clause. The power of the minister to waive payment is in situations of public interest, and public interest has to be substantiated and demonstrated. And such waiver is not on the basis of politically motivated ground, as the honorable member wants us to believe." Clause 29 of the bill states that, and I quote, "Nothing in this part shall prevent the minister from authorizing the director to limit in whole or in part the water allocated under any existing water use permit where the minister has reasonable cause to believe that it is in the public interest during times of water shortage or emergency to vary or modify the terms and conditions of any entitlement to use of water, first, to supply water to the needs of the public, to ensure that the reserved use of water contains sufficient water for the purposes specified in Clause 25, or a reserved water use shall only be used for public consumption or for purposes of public utility and safety. The power of the minister to vary a water allocation, Mr. Speaker, sir, one, is only during times of water shortage or emergency. Two, if there is reasonable cause to believe that it is in the public interest. And three, to supply public needs and for public consumption. We are here, Mr. Speaker, sir, talking of very specific and special circumstances. The bill has been so couched, Mr. Speaker, sir, to provide the adequate safety parameters to prevent abuse. And let me say that clearly, the bill does not give carte blanche to the Commission to vary existing water allocation. Mr. Speaker, sir, I refer to Clause 32. And let me again express my disappointment over the persistence of the honourable member who raised that issue, and also the leader of the opposition who canvassed that point, Mr. Speaker, sir. Clause 32(2) stipulates that the minister may, in the public interest, exempt any person from the requirement to hold a permit under this Act. Again, Mr. Speaker, sir, we are talking about special circumstances and not to exempt supporters of the regime, as the leader of the opposition puts it. Such circumstances, Mr. Speaker, sir, can be a natural disaster where exemption would facilitate access to essential water supplies for a rapid response to meet public needs during a crisis period. And I would like, Mr. Speaker, sir, to reassure the House that the inclusion of the concept of public interest in these clauses is in fact a safeguard against unfettered discretion. Now, let me come to another issue which was canvassed, which is linked again to the concept of public interest and to the comment that considerations relevant to economic operators are not addressed in this piece of legislation. And I would like to refer to Clause 8 of the bill, where one of the aspects to be taken into consideration by the Water Resources Technical Committee in determining water use entitlement is current and future social and economic needs. There were also comments, Mr. Speaker, sir, with regard to compulsory acquisition in the public interest. Clause 7 of the bill provides that the minister may, where the compulsory acquisition of any land is necessary in the public interest for the use, control, management, development, or protection of water resources, initiate the procedure for the compulsory acquisition of the land, which shall be carried out in accordance with the Land Acquisition Act. Again, Mr. Speaker, sir, such a measure can only be resorted to when public interest consideration has been established, and any compulsory acquisition will be as per the Land Acquisition Act, which already contains provisions related to compensation, challenge of legality, and appeals. The Water Resources Bill goes further to protect constitutional rights at clause 55, titled Legality and Compensation. Mr. Speaker, sir, an application for constitutional redress where a person alleges that any provision of the Constitution has been contravened may include claim for, I quote, the determination of the interest or right of the person, the legality of any taking of possession or acquisition of the existing water right or interest. The legality itself can be questioned, Mr. Speaker, sir. The bill has taken every care to protect the constitutional rights of the citizens. Honorable Otim also made reference to the designation of buffer zones. Buffer zones are critical components in water management and conservation efforts. These zones, Mr. Speaker, so why do we need to have buffer zones? Is to protect water quality by acting as protective barriers between water resources and the potential sources of pollution, control erosion given that the vegetated buffer zones stabilize the soil and therefore reduce sedimentation, and 3, act as an habitat for diverse plant and animal species, and 4, to promote sustainable development. Mr. Speaker, sir, according to him, landowners or those having an interest in the land concerned, where some designated activities cannot take place, should be compensated. But clause 33 provides for the possibility of works to be carried out with the authorization of the Commission, and compensation would only be applicable if there is an actual prejudice which is established by an aggrieved person. Now, the members of the other side also canvass on the argument that there has not been consultation with stakeholders during the preparation of this bill. Although what the leader of the opposition said seems nuanced, because he said he referred to the lack of protracted consultation with stakeholders and admitting that there have been consultations, although not long drawn out enough to his mind. Mr. Speaker, sir, I reiterate that consultations have been held both on national basis and individually. In addition, the Mauritius Chamber of Agriculture has officially submitted its memorandum to my ministry far back as in December 2022 to share its concern and proposals on the forthcoming bill. All this has been taken into consideration in drafting the bill, and I reassure the House that all constitutional rights have been upheld in the bill. And for the points, Mr. Speaker, sir, because I had a meeting with Business Mauritius, for the points they had raised in that meeting, these are reflected in the bill. I have clarified them in my speeches, and again, Mr. Speaker, sir, I would like to reassure the House and stakeholders concerned that the bill provides for a transition period of 18 months to iron out matters, find acceptable solution to specific situations, put in place the appropriate mechanisms, protocols, and also protocols for a transparent administration of the law. Mr. Speaker, sir, let me say something with regard to what Honorable Osman Mohamed said with regard to the URA. Because I need to clear that, Mr. Speaker, sir. Mr. Speaker, sir, the Water Resources Bill is not a utility legislation. Utility legislation are the CWA, CB, WMA, as per first schedule of the URA Act. Now, the objects of the URA, subject to the relevant utility legislation in accordance to Section 5 of the URA Act, is to inter alia ensure the sustainability and viability of utility services. And this is not connected at all with the Water Resources Bill, which deals with raw water. When he intervened, he made reference to the setting up of the URA when the legislation was voted, and he said that we voted the legislation in 2004. But what he doesn't tell you, Mr. Speaker, sir, that his party was in power between 2005 to 2014, and they did nothing with regard with the URA. It was only in 2016 that the URA became operational under this government, Mr. Speaker, sir. And this is the truth, Mr. Speaker, sir. Yeah. And they know why, Mr. Speaker, sir. Maintenant, Monsieur le Président, permettez-moi de faire quelques commentaires sur les arguments avancés par l'honorable membre Johanna Béranger lors de son intervention. Monsieur le Président, par rapport à la Water Resources Commission prévue dans le projet de loi, je dois préciser que c'est le Water Resources Unit, un département au sein du ministère de l'Énergie et des services publics, créé en 1993, qui sera remanié pour la mise sur pied du Water Resources Commission. Et ce n'est pas un one-person commission comme l'a voulu faire croire l'honorable Johanna Béranger. C'est un service qui comprend un directeur et plus de 80 officiers. Et parmi, nous avons des techniciens et des ingénieurs. Le WRU a toute l'expérience requise pour la construction des barrages, comme cela a été le cas, mais aussi pour faire ce qu'on appelle le risk assessment des barrages. Et cela a été le cas, je vais le dire, pour le Midlands Dam et le Bagatelle Dam. Concernant le rôle de la CWA, Monsieur le Président, la nouvelle loi définit clairement le rôle de chaque service. Le Water Resources Commission, comme prévu dans ce projet de loi, et ça, il faut bien comprendre, parce que je pense que les membres de l'opposition n'ont pas compris ça. La loi définit clairement le rôle de la CWA. Le Water Resources Commission s'occupera de la mobilisation, de la conservation, de la protection et de l'allocation de nos ressources en eau, tandis que la CWA s'occupera du traitement et de la distribution de l'eau potable à ses abonnés. Et c'est toute la différence, Monsieur le Président. Monsieur le Président, let me come to another aspect of this legislation, and then I'll conclude. Yeah, I need to clarify that because this was canvassed by members of the opposition with a possible overlapping of functions with other water management bodies. And they made reference to the CWA and the Wastewater Management Authority. Mr. Speaker, sir, I would wish to emphasize that the bill demarcates the responsibilities of the Water Resources Commission and other agencies in the water sector. These agencies will continue to operate within their respective legal frameworks. The roles and function of the Wastewater Management Authority are clearly defined in its act, and the Wastewater Management Authority will continue to perform same in relation to collection, treatment, and disposal of wastewater. In ensuring the optimal utilization of all water resources, the Commission can enter into agreement with public agencies for supply of water resources. Now, as for the CWA, it will operate downstream in the water chain, as it will receive bulk water from the Commission and will treat same and distribute it to the customers. Mr. Speaker, sir, let me seize this opportunity also to correct a misunderstanding that Honorable Utim said in this House with regard to the objects of the part of the objects of the CWA, which according to him has been repealed. It is contended that perhaps the Water Resources Commission has taken over these objects. Mr. Speaker, sir, this is incorrect. Only those objects, and I said that earlier, that are related to mobilization, development, and sustainable and integrated management of water resources have been transferred to the Water Resources Commission. Pour conclure, Monsieur le Président, alors que nous nous trouvons avec l'obligation de faire des réformes significatives, il est impératif d'adopter une approche visionnaire pour relever les défis complexes de la gestion, du contrôle, du développement et de la protection et de la conservation de nos ressources en eau. Cette nouvelle législation marque un tournant vers un système plus équitable, durable et qui peut s'adapter aux contraintes liées aux effets du changement climatique. Notre petit État insulaire, vulnérable aux effets néfastes du changement climatique, nécessite une stratégie de gestion de l'eau robuste et dynamique. Monsieur le Président, nombreuses sont les nations développées, moins développées, États insulaires qui ont franchi cette étape et qui ont engagé une réflexion et une réforme sur la gouvernance dans le secteur de l'eau. La législation que nous proposons aujourd'hui introduit un cadre holistique et intégré qui assure la participation de toutes les parties prenantes dans la gestion de nos ressources en eau. Cette approche améliore non seulement notre capacité à répondre aux besoins actuels, mais protège également les intérêts des générations futures. J'en ai dit, Monsieur le Président, je vous remercie. And I commend the bill to the House.